last class of this semester. As you know, next week there's just the final exam, right? So this is the last time you get a chance to see me in front of this classroom, at least for this semester, okay? So enjoy yourself. And we'll continue with this discussion on the economic development of Korea. And I don't know if I emphasized enough how big this thing is, right? For Koreans at least. Anyway, so the title, as you remember, Economic Development of Korea, the Miracle on the Han River. And so remember, I spent much of last week's class talking about how remarkable this whole transformation is for Korea as far as its economic development is concerned. So the question was, what are the factors that facilitated the remarkable economic development of Korea? And another question was, can Korea's success model be duplicated elsewhere today? So again, this question will be addressed toward the end of today's class. And also, why do some countries still remain poor? What are the factors? So we're going to talk about these questions today. So to remind you as to what has taken place so far, the factors which account for the economic growth of Korea include, remember these? International factors, role of leadership, role of the Korean government, role of culture, role of Korean workers, role of nationalism, role of timing, okay? And last week I covered one part of the international factors. Remember, there were these 4 international factors, and I covered this. So we're going to finish up the other 3, and then move on to number 2, number 3, number 4, and so on. Okay? Right? All right. So under international factors, after the colonial development, you know, sort of a question mark, it's the role of the U.S. So if you ever run into some, like, you know, men and women in their 60s and 70s and you find them to be very pro-American, they are the ones who sort of lived through, you know, the U.S. sort of not only intervening in the Korean War, but also helping Korea economically, okay? So here it is. U.S. played an important role in the economic development of Korea in 2 ways. One was just aid, okay? So from 1946 to the mid-1970s, this is how much U.S. provided like monetary and military help to Korea. It amounted to $12.6 billion, and in today's money, it is worth $120 billion, okay? And so the economic assistance amounted to $5.74 billion, worth in today's value, $54.7 billion in 2023, and military assistance, $6.84 billion. That's worth $65.2 billion in today's currency. And you know, even if you look at these figures in today's sort of value, you may say that doesn't sound much, but you know, you gotta just sort of transport yourself back to like 1950s and 60s when that total of money was worth much more than what it is today. Okay, so you can't just look at these figures and try to figure out how much those amounts meant from sort of today's standard. Okay? And second way the US helped Korea was this, which is impossible now, right? Because of the WTO. US allowed Korea to sell all of its products, okay? Unlimited access to the US market. At the same time, it allowed Korea to uphold protectionist policies for about over 20 years. Can you imagine the US doing that favor to anyone? Or any country doing that kind of a favor? Anyway, this meant, look at the next slide. You know, if you were to name some of the best brands in whatever today, you could name them, right? Back in the 1960s and 70s, these were the best brands in the world, okay? We're talking about Sony television, Brown transistor radio, Philips cassette tape recorder, Kodak camera, Gerber baby foods, Colgate toothpaste, Marlboro cigarettes, Ivory soap. All of these best brands that everyone wanted to buy were simply blocked off. They were not imported to Korea under the blessing of the US. What did that mean at the time? It meant Korean firms can domestically produce whatever Koreans needed. So this is when every major conglomerate in Korea got a big break. You know, one of the top conglomerates in Korea is LG. LG made all the toothpaste that Korean used. They made soap, okay? But if they had a competition like Colgate, do you think LG toothpaste would have sold anything? Because Colgate is simply, at the time and today even, the best toothpaste, right? So I like to jokingly say to Korean students, if you think your grandparents have bad teeth, that's because they used too much Korean toothpaste, which was not up to par with Colgate, I would say. Anyway, it was half joke, but nobody laughed anyway. So I don't know if you're appreciating how much this meant for Korean companies, okay? Because if Korean companies had to compete against the best brands at the time, they would have had no chance, right? Who would buy stuff made in Korea back in the 1960s when we were such a poor country producing only poor quality products? But Korean consumers had no other choice. They were stuck with these Korean products for over 20 years. Okay? So it was only in the 1980s when Korea was able to establish some footing in terms of economic growth that the US put pressure on Korea to finally open its doors for American and other foreign products. Okay? But again, Korea enjoyed this 20-some years of golden sort of a period where they had a full access to the Korean market. Okay? The third international factor is the Normalization Treaty of 1965 between South Korea and Japan. Now you must know this, right? When was Korea liberated from Japan? Nobody? It's not difficult because you just need to think of, yes, you just think of the year World War II ended. Because again, We did not defeat Japan. Japan was defeated during World War II. So we, anyway, 1945. So from 1945, for 20 years, Korea and Japan did not have a diplomatic relationship. You know what that means? No visas to travel back and forth. No Japanese manga in Korea. No Japanese songs. No Japanese television shows. No exchange of any kind. So the two countries remained with their ties cut. Okay? And I'm sure it was largely from the Korean side because the pain from the 36-year long colonial period was still so fresh that Koreans just did not have anything to do with Japan. But everything changed in 1965 because finally the two sides normalized their relationship. Okay? After 20 years of ties being cut off, and this is when, so we call it second period of Japanese influence. The first period was the colonial period from 1910 to 1945, and this is the second period, and look what Korea got. Korea received $300 million in grants, and it's worth $2.86 billion in today's value. The total was received as Economic Cooperation Fund, not as reparation. So there is still debate going on as to whether Korea got enough for all the rice and all the natural resources taken away by Japan and also all the exploitation that the Japanese government committed in Korea. Anyway, $300 million. But for Korea, that was a lot of money, right? Because when you want to industrialize, what do you need? You need foreign capital to buy expensive foreign equipment. To industrialize, to build factories, what do you need? Did Korea build all of its machineries? Or did it import all these machineries from the West and Japan? It's the latter. And in order to buy these expensive machines, you need money. And that $300 million at the time was a lot of money. Okay? And Korea also received a total of $500 million in loans. And this is also something important because, do you think poor countries have high credit rating or low credit rating? Low, right? And that means not only is it expensive to borrow money, sometimes you just get rejected. You want to borrow money, but no one wants to lend you any money because you have low credit rating. So this loan was also a significant amount for a country that is just trying to, or that just started to industrialize. Okay? Now, then what did Japan get for giving this money to Korea and lending this money to Korea? And this is the answer. Japan received immunity from all the atrocities that it committed. And what atrocities am I talking about? I'm talking about millions of forced laborers and also comfort women, believed to have been around 200,000. Okay, they have tried to take Japanese government and firms to court, but to no avail. Okay, so every time these cases were taken to Japanese courts, the ruling was the Japanese government does not owe anything to these Korean victims because of the normalization treaty. When they gave this $200 million and $3 million in grants and loans, the Japanese government is saying our responsibility for whatever happened in Korea is done and over with. Okay, so that's there's that negative side to this, in that there is this lingering issue, right? Fourth international factor is the Vietnam War. Okay, so this is the time, the period during which the Vietnam War took place. Not that Korea got involved from as early as 1955. Okay, but anyway, U.S. pressured and enticed Korea with economic rewards to send troops to fight in the Vietnam War. Okay, and in return, the U.S. equipped, trained, and paid for all the Korean forces in Vietnam. Okay? Now, this is what you see in a typical textbook. But it is argued that in 1961, Park Chung-hee came to power through a coup d'etat. And did the U.S. like him right away? No. So he actually approached the USA proposing that he would send troops to Korea, because he wanted to win the trust. Okay, he wanted to win he wanted to become friends with the USA. Okay, so he wanted to do something for the USA. But anyway, that's sort of a side note. But the point is, U.S. did pressure not only Korea, but many countries to send troops to Vietnam. And look how many soldiers South Korea sent. South Korea sent over 300,000 soldiers to fight in the Vietnam War. Okay? War that we had nothing to do with. Okay? And the same goes for, I guess, Americans. So the Korean contingent was the second largest after the U.S., which sent 3.1 million soldiers to fight in the Vietnam War. And there were other countries which sent troops too, right? New Zealand, Philippines, Thailand, Australia, South Korea, right? So U.S. pressured 23 countries, but only few countries complied. Okay? So what did Korea get? Lots of money. Okay? And here are the breakdown. Okay? And needless to say, it was a big boost to Korea's industrialization. Again, the factors that I'm mentioning, international factors, they all led to Korea receiving foreign capital. And again, foreign capital is needed to buy expensive machines. Okay? When you want to become an exporter of whatever, right? You need machines to manufacture goods to sell, right? So anyway, the economic benefits from 1965 to 1973 amounted to $1.9 billion. Okay? And that amounted to, so here's the breakdown, $266 million in salaries, $83 million in exports, and $1.36 billion worth of contracts, and so on. And that amounts to 30 to 40% of total exports and foreign earnings from 1965 to 1973. Now, do you think that was worth a lot or not? Okay? So again, these amounts do not really, matter to you, at least for understanding what happened. But I think the really telling figures are these, that what Korea earned from the Vietnam War between 1965 and 1973 amounted to 30 to 40% of total exports and foreign earnings during that period. So do you think now it sort of makes sense, right? Why the Vietnam War is often credited. I mean, it's a tragedy for Vietnamese, but for Korea, for Korean economy, it was a boon. And we'll talk about later what other cases you can think of. Okay, countries that benefited from other countries' wars. Okay, so here we go. Actually, Korea is not alone when it comes to countries which economically benefited from wars. Can you think of any examples in which countries benefited from wars? Anyone? Examples in which wars help boost the country's economic recovery or growth? Yeah, that's a better question. Yes? From whose war? Yeah. No, that doesn't count because after the war, I mean, during the war maybe even, Germany was devastated, right? Okay, I know what you're getting at. To prepare for war, all the factories were in full gear, and, producing all these equipments, military equipments. Now that's something I have to think about, and I'm sure it's good because you see, if I have the U.S. there, why not Germany, right? So the case of the U.S. is obvious, right? When did the Great Depression happen? Exact year. The year that it began. 1929. Good try. 1929. So when U.S. got involved in World War II, it was still reeling from the impact of depression. When so many workers were unemployed, they were like waiting in line for free meals on the streets and all that, right? But with U.S. getting involved in World War II, all of a sudden factories were running, for the first time. U.S. women began to work in mass. Okay, it was all made possible because of World War II. Okay, so again, if U.S. is included as an example here, Germany could easily be included too. Okay. So again, we're talking about something that actual engagement, right? Or war that is really happening elsewhere. So anyway, I'll look into the Germany case later, okay? Not necessarily for this class. But anyway, second is Japan. Now this is really an interesting story because U.S. sent 1.7 million soldiers to fight in the Korean War from 1950 and 1953. How far is the USA from, I'm talking about mainland USA. How far is mainland USA from Korea? We're talking about, what, 5,000 miles or 8,000 kilometers. So it made total sense to use Japan as a logistical base from which U.S. for 1.7 million soldiers and all the equipment and all the foods they need, they got it from Japan. So is it safe to say that Korean War was such a big boost for the Japanese economy that it was just trying to recover from the ruins of World War II? Okay? So they could not have waited for bigger bonus. This is not a right expression, but it's a very tragic war for Koreans, but for Japanese, they gain much. Okay, look at this. Payments from the U.S. accounted for 60 to 70% of Japan's total export during this period. Okay, so Japan's remarkable recovery from World War II is partly owed to the Korean War. Okay, now Japan is amazing in another sense because Japan benefited not just from one war, but two wars. And what's the other war that I'm talking about? I think you should be able to guess this. Yes, amazingly enough, Japan during the Vietnam War, now, Korean War, 1.7 million soldiers. Vietnam War, even almost double that, 3.1 million soldiers. And what did the US do? They did it again. They got all the necessary supplies, military and non-military, from Japan. Wow, isn't it? I don't know of any other country which benefited from two wars in just like 2 decades, you know? And it's not just a little sprinkle in the way of economic progress. We're talking about a major boost to the economy, right? And this one was for a longer period too. Okay, for longer period and for much larger number of soldiers compared to the Korea's case. And then Korea during the Vietnam War, as discussed earlier. Any other examples? Do you know of any other examples where countries benefited economically from wars of their own or wars of like neighboring countries or so on? Yes?
Maybe not to the extent of these, but I know because of all the sanctions in Russia now, a lot of Chinese companies have opened in Russia, so China's getting a lot of economic benefits from that, because all the Western brands are gone. So I don't know if it's like a government per se, but then a lot of Chinese companies are tied to the government. So
Is this something like an established fact or something like a rumor type?
no, I mean, it's true. Like, if you go and look at how the landscape of, like, Russian malls have changed now, there are all these Chinese stores in there now that were not there before. Not to the same extent, because all the Western brands left Russia because of the sanctions.
But I wonder if what you just say amounts to like 30, 40%.
That's why I said not to the same extent.
Oh, okay.
Just, yeah.
Good point. Anyone else? All right. Moving right along. So we had covered one factor now, right, out of 7, and that one included 4 sub-factors, right? Colonial development, normalization treaty, Vietnam War, and US aid, right? Now we turn to the second factor, and that's the role of leadership of head of state. Okay. See, the reason this particular factor came to my attention is this. You gotta go back to the 1960s, 70s, and 80s, because that's when there were more dictatorships. There were more authoritarian countries. Authoritarian meaning not really dictatorship, but still not full democracy. Okay? So in the 1960s, 70s, and 80s, there were many countries like Korea, developing, poor, okay, and under authoritarian rulers or dictators. So let's say there were like 100 such countries, okay, in Africa, in Asia, and in South America. Now, out of all these countries, Korea stood out in one sense. And that was, we had this president who was de facto dictator, but he was different from other dictators because he was the only president of all these countries that were poor and were under dictatorial rules. He was the only one who was committed to industrialization. So he may have taken away people's right to vote, people's right to free speech, like so many leaders of developing countries did, but at the same time, he had this vision that for Korea, it needs to industrialize so that people could finally overcome hunger and people could finally overcome poverty. So that's why leadership is important, right? Who makes decisions to industrialize? Is it low-ranking civil servants or ministers? The ultimate power as to deciding which direction a country goes, it is made by heads of state. Whether it's president or prime minister, that role is in the hands of this one person. Okay? And Korea happened to have had this dictator who was committed to industrialization. Okay? So it's a big if. What if we didn't have Park Chung-hee? Because that's the president who is credited with Korea's industrialization. Would Korea have industrialized without him? I don't know. Some distractors would say, yes, we had everything in place. No matter who was president at the time he was president, we would have went through the same process, okay? Which I do not agree with. But again, leadership is, I think, very important. Okay? And so it's what I just said earlier, right? Most countries in Africa and Asia, I should also add Latin America, had heads of state, there are just too many to mention, who were never interested in economic development. Okay? Many of them became infamous for pocketing billions of dollars from the government. Again, there are just too many of those leaders to mention. Okay? And we're talking about leaders from even the poorest countries, just taking the money and run. And leaders and elites in poor countries at the time also implemented policies largely to benefit themselves. And I think I have a really interesting thing to say. Let's say you are an economic elite in a small country. Small country meaning, let's say, 2 million, 5 million, and you are a super rich person who have a lot of influence on the president and also the political elite because you're such a rich person. Okay? Now you have many factories which employ a total of 100,000. Now, again, I told you to imagine yourself to be that, right? You're super rich You have a political influence. Not that you're actually running as a president or whatever, but because you have a lot of money, you have political influence, right, over political elite. You employ 100,000 people. Do you want your country to industrialize? When that means the wages of your employees going up, maybe going through the roof, okay? And when that happens, what happens to your profit? It cuts your profit, right? So I give an example here, right? If everything stays the same, status quo, you could hire 5 maids with the current income you have. But with wages going up, it means number of maids going down to 2, going down to 1, and going down to 0. Did you know that Korea had like a typical sort of a semi-upper middle class families had maids in Korea until the 1970s? Okay, so we were like Philippines, maids, rich families, maids. But why did they disappear in Korea, not in the Philippines? Maids disappeared in Korea because they became too expensive. Okay? Because countries industrialized, Korea industrialized. Okay? But if you are, again, super rich, you hire so many workers, you don't want your country to industrialize because it cuts into your profit. So that's why when this point is made, leaders and elites in poor countries implementing policies largely to benefit themselves and not caring for their own country, that's the kind of example that I'm giving you. Okay? So elites, political elites and economic elites pay a lot of lip service. But oftentimes, they're doing a lot of things for themselves. Okay? And don't be fooled by any politician that says, I'm doing this for the people, or I'm doing this for the country. It's a rhetoric that is used by practically every politician, whether it's democracy or, even it's okay. Okay, so I hope you are convinced about this importance of leadership, and this is the guy, Park Chung-hee. So in Korea, there is a controversy regarding Park Chung-hee's legacy because although he implemented all these policies to industrialize Korea, he did suppress democracy. And for about 7-8 years before he was assassinated, he ruled as practically a dictator. Okay, that nobody disputes. Okay. Anyway, so this man is credited with the country's industrialization. Okay, let me do this and before I give you a time for break. The third factor is the role of the Korean government. Okay, and what did the Korean government do that was different? So here we go. Korean economy was, and to a large extent, still is state-led or state-dominant rather than market-led economy. Okay? When you hear the term market-led economy, which country comes to your mind? US, right? So, like the next point says, do you know any economy that is fully government-controlled? Fully. No. Not even North Korea is fully controlled by the government. Okay? So, it's one of a difference of degree, not one of kind. So every country has a government that plays a role in the economy. But the difference is some countries are more heavily involved. I'm talking about the government. In some countries, the government is more heavily involved in the economic affairs of the country, and those countries are called state-led or state-dominant economies. And Korea is included. Can you think of any other countries that have a state-led or state-dominant? Yeah? Soviet Union? You mean Russia?
Well, Russia, but yeah.
So many authoritarian regimes, state-led. I would say many developing economies tend to be state-led too. Okay, again, government is more heavily involved in the economic affairs of the country, and the early model of this was set by Japan. Okay, so from the time Japan began to industrialize, from the mid 1800s, Japanese economy was under the guidance of the government to a large extent, and that's why there are metaphors like this: Japan Incorporated, and following this model, there's a saying, metaphor, Korea Incorporated, and another term for this is guided capitalism. Okay? Who guides the capitalism here? The government. Okay? So, guided capitalism in Korea between 1960s and 80s go like this. And I hope you know some of these. The government selected export-oriented industries for development. Protected fledgling domestic industries by implementing protectionist policies. So if you want to compare any of these with a different model, just think of the US. Would the US do this? Would the US do that? No. Market-led economy does not do this. Okay? But state-led economy does those. Okay? Third, Korean state entrusted the chaebol as a major undertaker of industrialization, giving them all kinds of privileges. Okay? And those include cheap loans with long maturity periods. You know, this is still owned by the Korean government. Okay? This is now privatized. Can you imagine a government owning a bank to give out loans to selected corporations? And who were they? They were mostly chaebol. Okay? So you see, again, chaebol was given a lot of privileges, including cheaper loans with longer maturity periods, and also when chaebol wanted to borrow money from foreign banks, government guaranteed the borrowings. Again, can you imagine your government doing this even back in the 1960s and 70s? And I'm sure if you come from economically developed countries, the answer is no. But this happened in Korea. Okay? And also charged lower tax rates to selected industries and firms. This is so blatant discrimination, right? Again, going back, you give cheap loans to just few companies that the government thinks they're doing the right things. Okay? They give companies long maturity periods. Who? Just the chaebol, right? And you guarantee foreign borrowings for these targeted companies, and also lower tax rates, and also protected selected corporations by restricting entry of other firms into the same industry. So for this, I always give an example of CJ. Do you know what CJ is? Korean company CJ. CGV, you know the theater chain? That's CJ. Turlajur, the bakery. And CJENM, so to that group belongs a lot of unknown K-pop artists. So they're into this entertainment business. It's one of the largest conglomerates. You know how they made all the money? They were exclusive importer of sugar and flour. I mean flour that you eat, right? And how did the exclusive licensing work? So let's say you're a brilliant trader. You find cheaper, better quality sugar, and you want to import. So you apply to the government for permit. And guess what answer you got? For like 20, 30 years. No. So CJ made all the money it needs from this exclusive licensing. Not only, of course, it's not just the sugar and flour, but many other products that it did import. Okay. Eighth, repressed organized labor. In the 1960s, 70s, and 80s, you know what competitive edge Korean products had? Was it quality or price? It was price. So Korean products were selling like hotcake because they were cheap. Okay? So that's why the government played a major role in suppressing labor, because labor movement, what do they usually demand for? Higher wages, right? So they repressed organized labor. And another thing the government did for capitalism was to encourage people to save money. Why is this important? Because if money is saved, bank has all of your money, right? And bank could easily lend that money that's in the bank to firms, so that the firms could use that money to buy expensive machines. Okay? Not only that, in order to manufacture goods, what do you need to buy? Natural resources that Korea so sorely lacks, right? So I'll stop here, and it's 6:05, and I'll give you, since it's our last class together for this term, 10 minutes. Okay? No, not even 10 minutes now. It's 6:06. So I'll see you back here at 6:15. All right? Okay, welcome back. So the rest rather short, except for nationalism. Okay. So we talked about how many factors now? International factors, leadership, government, right? So now the fourth factor, it's the role of culture, and it's Confucianism. And so Confucianism has all of these pro-growth ethics, including education, hard work, self-discipline, harmony, sincerity, collectivism, loyalty. Again, these are all Confucian values which help industrialization, because hard work, diligence is a value of Confucianism, and if you are hardworking, of course, it's good for economic development. Okay, education means people who could read and write are more easily trainable than those who are not, right? And harmony means If you start working for a company, you see, you develop this harmonious relationship with not only your colleagues, but also your seniors, the management, right? And so this is a role of culture, Confucianism. And fifth, maybe I'm going too fast. Korean workers themselves, they're hardworking, well-educated, easily trainable, and also they endured low pay and poor working conditions. Because again, the Korean products during the early industrialization period, I shouldn't say early, but during Korea's industrialization in the 1960s and 70s and 80s, it was cost competitiveness that made Korean products to sell. So Koreans, they did endure low pay and poor working conditions, and for a long time they endured the longest average work week in the world, okay, for decades, okay. So you can easily sort of see how Korean workers played a major role, okay, in Korea's economic development. Again, especially because Korean products at the time depended on their price competitiveness. Sixth factor is the role of nationalism. And I think this is the most tricky one, okay? And this is what I mean. Before industrialization, what kind of job did Koreans have? Yes, they're farmers. And how is farmers' work qualitatively different from factory work? See, farmers work when they feel like it, when they need to. And in the winter, they don't do nothing. There's no work, no work need to be done, right? If you're a farmer, right? And you have the busiest time in the spring and in the fall, but you have a easy time in the summer, but you have a rather flexible schedule, okay? But with factory work, it's 9 to 5, 9 to 9, typically, in the 1960s and 70s. So how do you convince Koreans to come to work to work at factories? How do you convince them that they need to work overtime till 10 o'clock in the evening? How do you convince them to work on Saturdays? And how do you convince them or persuade them to work on Sundays? Nationalism. Okay, you work hard, you work overtime, you work in the factory for the benefit of your country. Now, if I stop there, of course you're not going to be convinced why this argument makes sense, because you work hard, you work overtime, you work in these terrible working conditions at factories so that your country can achieve all these. Eliminate hunger. You eliminate poverty. Improve living standards. You have public services. Make education available. Okay? Until the 1950s, most Koreans just had elementary education. Not even that. Okay? So with economic development, you get all these. You improve your health, you live longer, you have hospitals to go to, and so on, right? Also, strengthen sovereignty. Why? Korea had been invaded so many times. Why? Because the country was weak. So if you work hard, if you work in the weekends, and your country develops, what happens? You strengthen your sovereignty. Okay? And also, at the time, we're talking about 1960s, 70s, and 80s, there was a constant sense of crisis because of North Korea. So the idea was our country, if our country gets developed, we could defend better. Okay? So that idea also sold. And also, the 19th, the Cold War began in 1945, lasted till the early 1990s. So the period during which Korea industrialized, there was this Cold War rivalry, right? So economic development of Korea would mean that we're better than North Korea, right? So again, before industrialization, most people worked as farmers. And to convince them, to persuade them to come to factories to work in this very strange and foreign work routine, 9 to 5, 9 to 10, 9 to 12, and also on weekends on a daily basis without any holidays. Korean workers may get 2-week, 3-week holidays, but did you know that in the 1960s and 70s, there were no annual holidays? Okay? Practically nobody went on a holiday, right? So anyway, you do all these, you sacrifice yourself for the sake of the country, so that the country you're loving, the country that you care so much about, achieves all these. Okay? So do you think this was widely accepted by Koreans or rejected? Widely accepted. Okay? Wholeheartedly accepted. Okay? They finally have this vision that after millennia of ineffectiveness, hunger, starvation, and weakness, if we work hard, we industrialize and we achieve all these, right? And to promote these ideas, the government also used Japan as an enemy. Okay? So the slogans were like these: let's catch up with Japan. Let's beat Japan. And let's surpass Japan. So in the 1960s and 70s and 80s, you go to your work, on the walls, what do you see? Those slogans. Okay? You get in the elevator, what do you see? Those slogans and posters. Okay? And also, North Korea was served as the other external enemy. Under constant fear of North Korean attack, nationalism convinced South Koreans that they must work hard. Okay? To build a strong economy in order to enhance their military strength against the North, and to prove to the world that their country is more economically advanced than their northern counterpart, and to prove to the world that their society is better and superior than their northern counterpart. Now, South Korea does not have to do that now, right? But back in the 1960s and 70s and 80s, we did have to prove that, okay? Because of the Cold War, and we're still trying to prove to the world, right? So as mentioned, signs and posters, they were on the walls of offices, factories, as well as in elevators and on the streets, billboards and banners, all these ideas, work hard, let's beat Japan, right? Let's surpass Japan. And also, there's these words were also like on many posters. You know what these sayings were? 하면 된다 in Korean. That means if you do it, it'll work. Okay? And the other one was 잘 살아보자. Let's live well together. Those were catchphrases to convince Koreans to work hard. Okay? These ideologies were also thoroughly advanced by the mass media, including television, newspaper columns, schools, and even churches during sermons. So imagine this. You go to your church, whether it's Protestant or Catholic, and the priest or the pastor goes, "How did you work last week? Did you work hard? If you didn't, you committed a sin." Okay? You really have to work hard for the sake of the country. Okay? Again, believe it or not, that did happen. Okay? So the whole country was in this, okay, this industrialization drive mode. Korean people themselves largely consented to the idea of strengthening the nation through economic development because of their experience and intimate knowledge of the past social ills, such as starvation and poverty. Again, this hunger was real. Did you know that until the 1960s, in the springtime, when the food shortage becomes the most acute, many people resorted to eating tree barks because there's no food to eat. Okay, there's a type of tree barks that you could eat, right? Anyway, that's the key point, right? Seventh factor. This is the last factor, right? It's sort of a summary, right? And it's economic opportunity in Vietnam, the construction boom in the Middle East. Although this was not mentioned as an international factor, because it does not amount to as much as what the Korea gained from the sort of engagement in the Vietnam War. And this one was more of a private affairs, meaning some construction companies getting big contracts, and also thousands of workers from Korea going there as migrant workers, right? So again, in terms of scale, no comparison. And also the openness of the international market, okay. And also in the 1990s, the end of the Cold War meant economic opportunities in China, the former Soviet Union, and Eastern Europe. Okay? So as far as the factors of the miracle on the Han River are concerned, this is it. 7 factors. Okay? Now, based on that, I want to talk about these implications. And first implication is this. Can Korea's economic success story be duplicated elsewhere today? This question is pertinent because, as I mentioned earlier, maybe last week, many leaders, many policymakers from developing countries come to Korea to this day to learn what Korea did right, and they want to emulate, right? Now, to answer this question, you got to look at these, the factors that we have discussed, okay? So you could go one by one. Can this be duplicated or emulated? Yes or no? Okay? What about leadership? What about role of the government? That's probably the most obvious yes question, right? What about culture? Can culture be copied? So this one would be most difficult, right? What about workers? Yes. No. I think the better term is emulated. Mm. Okay. Thank you. All right. What about nationalism? Possible, right? What about timing? Probably not. Next question is, how do you explain the existence of so many poor countries still? Okay, so in light of Korea's economic success, it is worth thinking about the following question: why do many countries still remain poor today? Okay, and I hope you could look up this book. Not for you to read the whole book, but if you type the bottom billion, you get a nice entry. You get a Wikipedia entry, and just reading the Wikipedia article will do the trick of appreciating what this book is about. So this book from 2007, The Bottom Billion, Why the Poorest Countries Are Failing and What Can Be Done About It. There are 4 poverty traps of the poorest countries. And to Paul Collier, he's referring to some 60 poorest countries in the world. Okay? And home to almost 1 billion people. And how many people are there in the world again? 8 billion, right? So we're talking about roughly 15% of the world population being stuck. Do you have a choice of which country you're born into? So it's so sad, right? These people, like 1 billion people living in these just poorest countries, many of them living on less than $1 a day, right? Or now it's like $1.50 a day, right? And the bottom billion, that's the cover of the book. And it says, bottom billion is used to refer to the poorest people in the world. 70% are found in Africa, but also includes Haiti, Bolivia, Laos, North Korea, and Yemen. Okay? And they suffer from shorter lifespans, high infant mortality, high rates of malnutrition. I should definitely include something missing here, and that's starvation. Just not having enough food to eat on a regular basis, right? We take food for granted, but sometimes, do you guys feel hungry from time to time because you missed your lunchtime or dinner time? Wow, that's when whenever I feel that, instead of thinking about people who may be hungry, I better not say it. Anyway, these are 4 traps. Okay? Conflict trap is self-telling, right? It's so countries trapped in a cycle of continuing civil wars or frequent violent coup d'etat, or countries that are having civil strife. There's no political stability. In order to achieve economic development, you need your country to be politically stable. Okay? People have to feel safe, right? So that's conflict trap. Second is natural resources trap, and this is ironic because natural resources trap happen when countries develop excessive dependence on abundant natural resources. Can you think of any countries where that has happened? I mean, there are countries which develop because of their, that abundance in natural resources. I'm talking about countries like Saudi Arabia, okay, Qatar, okay. But then, what are some examples of the opposite situation? Venezuela. But more than Venezuela, the country that comes to your mind right away is Nigeria. Nigeria has the world's 5th largest oil reserve, and it is, churning out all these oil. But what's happened? What's going on in Nigeria? Nigeria had this tragedy of having had series of military leaders who just took the money and run. Okay, just a classic example of not having a proper leadership who is committed to country's development. Okay, so again, this is natural resources trap where countries become overly dependent on abundant natural resources. Okay. Third is, not in any particular order, bad governance trap. A government with bad policies can destroy the entire economy for decades. I think this is where you really need to take a look in the book. Okay, what examples the author gives, right? And fourth, landlocked with bad neighbors, and this is no access to the coast, limited infrastructure, surrounded by unstable regions. So I guess I should do my own homework, what are the example countries? But can you think of a landlocked country with good neighbors? I could think of one country where it is landlocked, meaning no access to the coast, but it is surrounded by nice neighbors. Should I give you a hint? Pizza. No. It's one of the countries surrounding that country that it's Switzerland. It's a landlocked country, but surrounded by Italy, France, and Germany. Or is there any other country? Austria too?
Yes, well, Austria is also
Which?
Austria is also.
Oh, Austria is also landlocked. Okay.
But they do border with
Okay. Now I had a third question, and that was whether chaebol is an engine of growth for Korean economy, or whether it's a curse. Now, that question I think is important because chaebol accounts for anywhere between 60 to like 80% of all the economic activities of Korea. 60 to 80. Okay? Now, if they account for that big amount or big proportion of the Korean economy, what proportion of employees do you think they're responsible for? Or what percentage of all the employees in Korea work for chaebol? Is it 60%, 50%, 40%, 30%, 12%? I'm terribly sorry to say, it's 13%. 13. So you really have to rethink whether chaebol is good for Korea or not, at least in the sense of job creation. Okay? Because what chaebol is criticized for is that it kills competition. Okay? because whatever good ideas you have or whatever good products you make, they could make it better because they have the financial resources, they have the human resources to beat you in any way possible, right? So I think, there are a lot of things to appreciate about Chaebol, but at the same time, if you look at the job creation part or aspect, you sort of have sort of a lingering doubt as to whether Chaebol is all that good for the Korean economy. But the fact of the matter is, the Korean economy is dominated by the Chaebol by far. I don't know of any other country where a few number of conglomerates have that much dominance or market share. Okay. Anyway, on that note, do you have any questions about the final exam? So the final exam has the same format, but a new format this time is that there may be a question or two where you don't have a choice. It's a question you have to answer. Okay? And a question or two will also come from the assigned readings. Okay? So make sure you read those chapters. All right. Any question about the final exam? Yes?
Since we didn't see the population and organization in class,
But yes, the population, that was uploaded, recorded lecture, right? 이조교. 그 population 녹화한 거 올리지 않았나? 그때 수업을 내가 못한 적이 있지. So was there one lecture that I missed because we didn't. So the population was last week. It was supposed to be last week, right? Okay. Then it's okay. You could skip that. Even the readings. Bonus? So that was a good question. So no lecture on the population and urbanization, and the assigned readings, also no need to read them. Yes? That was for last week. Yes. No. So the final exam will only cover stuff from week 9, week 8, no. Week 9, sorry. So week 9 to week 14 are the stuff that will be covered on the final exam. Anything else? Okay, guys, it was a blast to have you guys in my course, and I hope you have a wonderful life. Okay? So thank you.